Libby Canna started transcribing. Okay, so Libby, we've started the recording, correct?
Yes.
The recording has been commenced. Thank you.
Okay, so we're recording, correct? Yes. Okay, so welcome everyone to the Town of Bassendean briefing session for the 15th of March 2022. This meeting is being held online in accordance with Regulation 12.2 and 14D of the Local Government Administration Regulations 1996. Public notice is hereby given that due to the public health emergency arising from COVID-19 that we have commenced holding our meetings online. The first item on the agenda is the opening. So I'd like to acknowledge the Town of Bassendean acknowledges the past and present traditional owners of the land on which we gather to conduct this meeting and pays its respects to their elders, both past and present. And I neglected to say we opened the meeting at 10 minutes past 6. We have, the next item is attendances and apologies. So there's no apologies for tonight. Attendances, does anyone have holidays, upcoming holidays they wish to declare? I believe Councillor McLennan, you might have.
Yeah, I do, but I didn't think we needed to deal with that until next week when we take a vote.
It's just on my list, that's all. Okay, so we'll move to item 3, which is declarations of interest. I believe, Councillor Ames, you have a declaration of interest in item 8.1 due to your long association with Swan Districts Football Club, and 8.2 due to an associate or relative who owns land backing onto a right-of-way. Is that correct, Councillor Ames?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, that is correct, and they're the only conflicts of interest that I am present with. So, thank you very much.
Okay, and I have a proximity interest to item 8.2 in that my property backs onto a right-of-way, and Councillor McLennan will be invited to preside over that item when we come to it. Announcements. This meeting is not being live streamed, but will be uploaded tomorrow. The fact that we are meeting online still affords the opportunity for residents to ask questions, make statements, or provide deputations, as tonight will demonstrate. Tonight is not a decision-making forum. We are meeting online for health and safety reasons in acknowledgement of the rising COVID case numbers. Apologies for those who may have experienced technical issues over the weekend with some of the electronic links provided in the agenda not opening properly. I am assured that these are now sorted. We have received a good number of questions and statements, so I thank you in advance for your patience and perseverance. There are item 5 is petitions. There are none. So we will move on to public question time and statements. I will read out the question and the relevant officer will answer and respond. Okay. So the first question is from Gerard Coleman, 11A Harcourt Street, Bassendean. And the question is, as Bassendean is classed as a historic town, what provision has the town got for motorhome or caravan parking, be it a temporary short stay or overnight? Most historic towns have 24 or 48-hour free camping facilities provided by local shire or council to promote the town. Also, will the town be considering erecting tourist road signs to promote the town? And I will ask the officer to respond to that, which I would assume is Mr. Gibson.
Yes. Hamilton. Just beforehand, are we accepting questions about items that aren't on the agenda this evening?
I was provided this list this afternoon.
This question may relate to the right-of-way strategy.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I don't believe it relates to any item on the agenda, but if you'd like, I can respond to it.
I'll allow a response. I've already read the question out, so Mr. Gibson, if you would like to respond.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, the Caravan Parks and Camping Grounds Regulations 1997 make provision for camping on land other than at a caravan park. Particular relevance is Regulation 11.1a, which states that a person may camp for up to 3 nights in any period of 28 consecutive days on land which he or she owns or has a legal right to occupy. It also goes on to say that someone might camp for longer than 3 nights if they obtain a relevant approval. So broadly under the regulations, there is provision for people to camp with friends or family in the district, which is what I assume the question is getting at. Otherwise, more broadly, the town is not currently intending on providing dedicated public caravan facilities, nor tourist park, nor tourist road signs.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Move on to the next question, which is from Drew Strayberg, 58A Scadden Street, Bassendean. It's regarding item 8.2. Regarding proposed right-of-way number 5, whilst I am pleased the council has seen reason and opted to recommend formally closing this laneway, leaving it until such time as the resident using it for caravan access at one end of the laneway and redevelops his home would appear open-ended in terms of timeline. Would it not be reasonable to suggest a time frame for the resident to reconfigure the caravan access point so that the laneway might be formally closed sooner rather than later? I would suggest within 2 years. Would this be reasonable? The gentleman goes on to say, I would also like to know the status of the residents' ability to purchase the land behind their houses following the proposed closure of the laneway. It could expand our property lines by between 2.5 to 5 metres, assuming the opposing tenant did not want the land. And this would be of great benefit to the value of residents. Personally, we are delaying our landscaping whilst this issue is resolved and would like confirmation of the council's position on this. Mr. Gibson.
Through Madam Mayor, most of those questions there are questions for council. But in terms of the residents' ability to purchase land behind their houses, page 12 of the agenda sets out that landowners would need to agree as to the distribution of all of the land that makes up the right-of-way, which responds to the third part of the question there. Otherwise, as I said, the questions are really ones for council in the manner that they choose to adopt the right-of-way strategy.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. The third question is from Mr. Yates of Thompson Road, Bassendean. As a matter of some urgency, the Statutory Planning Committee 6 weeks ago outlined the changes required to Bassendean's pending Local Planning Scheme 11 so it could be approved for the next step of community advertising. 3 weeks ago, Mr. Rowan Miller of the WAPC indicated that the task had not been completed to his satisfaction as it does not agree with many aspects of State Planning Policy 4.2 activity centres and urban corridors. When will the town's senior staff and councillors ensure compliance of Local Planning Scheme 11 as requested by the SPC so Local Planning Scheme 11 can be advertised and attract possible developers where costs are not a major concern? Mr. Gibson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, again, this does not relate to a matter on the agenda, but assuming you're happy for me to provide a response. The SPC's decision relates to the draft amended local planning strategy. And in that respect, the town submitted the draft amended document to the department for review in late February this year. And at this point, no response has been received.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Can I just ask our CEO, Peter Mabbs, Ms. Mabbs, there's another question coming up here which does not appear to have any relevance to the agenda. Is there any issue with bypassing those questions and having them answered in writing to the resident, or would you prefer that they be answered now, given they're on this list?
We can email the resident as an alternative.
Okay.
Thank you.
So that one's Mr. Greg Ledkett. So I'll leave that question out because I don't perceive that as having related to any item on the agenda. I shall also ask, because some of these questions relate to item 8.2, where I have declared a proximity interest, but given it's just reading out a question and having the officer answer, do you have any problem with me continuing to read out questions that relate to 8.2, or should I leave them for the Deputy Mayor? It seems a little bit disjointed to do it that way.
No, that's fine, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question is from Carol Halmich of Iolanthe Street, Bassendean. It relates to item 8.2. I would ask the council why, since the petition was submitted and presented in September 2021, it is disappointing there was no subsequent communication from the town of Bassendean with residents. Between that time, there were 2 incidences where vehicles drove through the laneway. On one occasion, the vehicle vandalised the bollards near the house at number 9 Iolanthe Street and drove away to leave the laneway open and accessible. I reported this incident to the Mayor. This is clear evidence that the laneway must be closed permanently to provide safety for local residents. Mr. Gibson, would you like to answer this, or would you rather wait until the item is questions are asked by councillors?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm happy to respond to it. It's obviously a statement from the landowner or the resident, but I think there's probably something that requires clarification there. The suggestion is that there was no communication from the town following the September 2021 receipt of the petition. However, as you can see from the page 7 of the agenda, the draft right-of-way strategy was actually advertised during October and November. So there, in fact, was contact from the town following the receipt of the petition.
Okay. Okay, so the next one is from Vanessa Yeoman, 60 Scadden Street. This also relates to item 8.2. Comment for council meeting to consider draft right-of-way strategy. I notice that the right-of-way is now recommending closure, which I support. I would like the council to also pursue active closure as soon as possible, not for it to be left as is. I would also like to put forward an acquisition request at 60 Scadden Street, lot 42 DP 25275. I note that lot 778 at 62 Scadden Street is utilising the right-of-way, stating that closure will not be pursued until it is redeveloped. So if closure occurs, then as they are on the corner, acquisition would mean they can continue to have access to their sheds. Then all owners can have the option to acquire abutting portions of right-of-way. So I would support this motion rather than keeping the empty laneway and all the associated negative issues. Mr. Gibson, would you like to answer or just bypass that at the moment?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I suppose it's a matter for council to consider, but I would say that the property in question, number 62 Scadden Street, is not on the corner. It is located the first block in from the corner.
That's from Penzance Street, isn't it?
Correct, Madam Mayor.
Okay, the next one is from Carol Seidel, 55 Broadway, Bassendean, also regarding item 8.2. Reading the officer's report seems to show many lanes within the town are recommended to be closed, with many residents wanting their rear right-of-ways partially closed or fully closed. One would expect the residents who live on right-of-way number 5 should be given the same respect and opportunity to have right-of-way number 5 closed at the back of their properties, which is not a big ask from council. A partial closure of right-of-way 5 that would still accommodate the owner at number 62 Scadden Street would seem to be sensible and a practical way to progress closure of the remaining right-of-way that has been the express preference of the majority of the other landowners backing onto right-of-way number 5. The officer's report also indicated the purchaser of any right-of-way portion must pay for surveys and land gate fees. This is odd given the town will receive the land for free and ultimately will be the seller of the right-of-way land, as the seller of the land should be paying for these costs, not the purchaser, as is proposed in the officer's report. Over the years, most residents who have this laneway at the back of their property will tell you it's been a highway for people who break into their homes or use the lane as an escape route to avoid the police, which has been the case again a few months ago with a home invasion. A lot of people have made their rear fences higher to make accessing their properties harder to enter. Most of the residents are wanting the lane to be closed, as my petition showed, that was sent to the previous council on the 9th of October 2021. What has taken place in the last 2 to 3 months in the lane just reinforces the need for this lane to be closed for security reasons as a high priority that has to be reinforced, the need for the lane to be closed for security reasons. Okay, Mr. Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A lot of that was obviously a statement. However, I would take the opportunity to say that the submitter's comment that the town will receive the land for free and ultimately be the seller of the right-of-way land is quite incorrect. As you can see at the top of page 13 in the agenda, the proceeds from any closure and sale of Crown land would go to the state government. So the landowners would be liable for those costs.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. This is a very long, it says it's a question, okay. It's from Kerry Robson of 1 Marion Street, Eden Hill. It's relating to item 8.4. My question for council is not a question, but rather a plea for not rescind the ban on glyphosate use on hard surfaces, or in fact anywhere in the town of Bassendean. At a high level, my objections are based on the following. Council is basing its determination about the health implications of glyphosate based on one source. This is naive at best, in my view. A comprehensive review of wider credible research clearly evidences serious concerns that should not be ignored. There has already been extensive legal action on this issue. Roundup is found to be about 90% of food products tested by the US government, including honey. Glyphosate, sold as Roundup, has been banned in dozens of countries worldwide and by multiple Australian local governments because of its toxicity to humans. And that list is growing every year as jurisdictions start to recognise the potential liability implications as well as the well-being and environmental impacts, both direct and indirect. Peer-reviewed research is also available on the indirect effects of glyphosate on plant, animal and human health through its effects on microbial communities as well. Okay. Given Bassendean already lays on some of the planet's most untenable soil, many gardeners like myself have invested considerable time and money into building soil quality, and the return to glyphosate use could have serious and detrimental impacts on those efforts. Opt-out systems are pretty much pointless in maintaining anything resembling an organic garden. If they start spraying from the adjoining corner of my neighbour's property, my risk and exposure is only partially mitigated, and only if runoff is directed away from my property line. According to their review, many weeds in the town of Bassendean have become glyphosate resistant thanks to historical spraying practices, and this is supported by worldwide research. A paper in the NIH National Library of Medicine information reports subsequent to the evolution of genetically modified glyphosate resistant crops and the extensive use of glyphosate over the last 45 years, about 38 weed species developed resistance to this herbicide. To claim this resistance is an argument to abandon steam weeding and return to glyphosate seems inappropriate. Continued use of glyphosate will logically only exacerbate the problem further in the future and certainly won't solve it in the shorter term. Council's encouragement for homeowners to actively invest in and garden their verges to both beautify the township and improve its biodiversity and ecological health is inconsistent with the use of a herbicide spray bordering such gardens. The use of glyphosate is toxic, indiscriminate, and overspray is inevitable. It has yet to be evidence that the program of steam weeding currently in use reflects best practice. I work from home. I'm just checking if that's the same email. I work from home the majority of the week and have only ever twice seen anybody steam spraying down Walter Road. That said, the problem with large areas has nothing to do with the effectiveness of steam weeding and everything to do with the failure by some property owners, particularly but not exclusively commercial property owners, to manage the significant weed problems along Walter Road. Which informs the next point I wish to make. Steam spraying is also most effective as part of a wider strategy which could in limited and judicious applications include organic herbicides, but which also encompasses other strategies such as manual removal, incentivising homeowners to manage surrounding weeds, and policing and managing properties with major weed presence or problems. Additional damage to road infrastructure has been cited as justification, but I have seen no evidence of this. Can council staff actually provide any evidence that steam weed spraying is causing such damage, and qualify what such damage has happened and where? In my own case, I have an evolving urban food garden which is providing food for my family. As a 20-year resident of the town, I hesitated to grow food on my corner block in the early years, in part because of council's use of glyphosate, and particularly given one of my property's boundaries is built up against adjacent footpath to Walter Road East. I have fruit trees immediately behind and seasonal vines climbing on that boundary fence. The areas of soil in the curves of the corrugated fence would channel any overspray directly onto the root systems of my food garden. I thank council members for considering my concerns and plead with you to think long and hard about the array of implications from rescinding the current position and returning to glyphosate use. Councillor Gibson, Mr. Gibson, would you like, oh sorry, not Mr. Gibson, Nicole, would you like to respond to this?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There's quite a lot of detailed comments in that plea. So I guess some of the key points would be that while we're relying on the APVMA, they have actually reviewed a significant number of peer-reviewed scientific studies, so over 4,000. And their position that glyphosate doesn't cause cancer is also found by other agencies around the world. So there's a number of them. The comment about the glyphosate resistance, we haven't referred to that in the report, so I'm not sure what that's relating to. And glyphosate resistance is not a reason why we're recommending commencing or recommencing the use of glyphosate. And what was the other point? Yeah, I think some of the other areas will get addressed when we get to the item, which I can talk about, and possibly if there's other questions after then, I can respond to them after the meeting in writing.
Okay, thank you for that. This is the last question from Nonnie Jefferson of 6 Barton Parade, Bassendean. I would like to make a comment on item 8.4 concerning weed management. Rescinding the suspension of the use of glyphosate-based herbicide on hard surfaces within the town is a backward step. Steam treatment kills weeds, weed seeds, and has been successful in eliminating fleabane, prickly lettuce, snow thistle, and other annual weeds where they once thrived. These weeds are still abundant where GBH are used because they are developing glyphosate resistance. For an example of this, look at the median between Swan District's football oval and the Hawaiian Shopping Centre. Volunteers working in parks and reserves have noticed that contractors frequently spray plants, including those listed above, when they are mature and already seeding. This results in desiccation of the seed heads and actually hastens the ripening of the seeds. It is used in agriculture for this purpose. Example, she's provided a link here. This will result in increased weed seed dispersal, keeping the spray contractors at work. Hand removal or slashing of plants during this phase of their life cycle is way more efficient. The development of glyphosate resistance is a well-known side effect of the overuse of GBH. Ms Davies, would you like to respond to that one?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the comment about the Hawaiian Shopping Centre median, so that's a open landscape garden bed. And so there was quite a long time where glyphosate wasn't used even in that area. And it's, I believe, only recently recommenced. So that's not really a particular example of where glyphosate's been used. Comment about the seed heads, definitely timing is important to make sure if herbicides are applied, they're done before it's the plant seeding. And with regards to glyphosate resistance, the aim of the weed management is to try and minimise and reduce glyphosate. So over time, we're looking to trial new technologies like the electric weeding trial, and are hopeful that those types of technologies will become more readily available, and that we'll be able to effectively control the weeds while also avoiding the use of glyphosate.
Thank you for that. So that concludes question time and statements. We'll move on to item 7, which is deputations. We have one deputation tonight from Ms Jane Bremer, and I would ask Ms Bremer to introduce herself and commence her deputation.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My name's Jane Bremer. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
My name's Jane Bremer. I reside at 47 7th Avenue in Bassendean. I've been a resident of Bassendean for 22 years. I am an environmental health and justice researcher and consultant. I work for the National Toxics Network, which is a national environmental health and justice NGO, and the International Pollutants Elimination Network, which is an international organisation that follows and participates in all of the international chemical conventions. I also served 10 years on the Australian Federal Government's Industrial Chemicals Regulatory Committee with a focus on the existing chemicals program. So my deputation today is in relation to item 8.4, and I'm going to try and be very specific to the officer's report as it's written in the minutes, in the agenda, sorry. But I do want to start by saying what extreme duress myself and the public have been put under in not being notified with any kind of real time to prepare. So I've had to do a very rushed deputation, I'm sorry, and I hope it comes across okay. And if there are any questions or information councillors would like, I'm happy to follow up. So agenda item 4, the officer's recommendation. I'll start with the steam weed monitoring report. The town of Bassendean's officer has focused on the effect of steam treatment between the dates of April and August and identifies 2 weed species that have not been successfully eradicated. Despite this, the officer's investigation shows that steam has in fact been successful and just as effective as pesticides overall. This then begs the question as to why there isn't an officer recommendation before council to revert back to the full use of pesticides, not just glyphosate, and expand the application of pesticides throughout the entire town's hard surfaces, parks, playgrounds, and natural areas. A selective documentation of pictures in 2020 and 2021 is not sufficient to provide evidence to dismiss steam weed control. The timing of the study falls within the weed growth period that is not sensitive to the application of steam or pesticides. This was communicated to the staff, but no action was taken. The town of Bassendean has used the services of 3 steam treatment companies now at least, one that had no experience at all, one that had utilised inappropriate equipment, and one that was confined to operate at times that they recommended against. The most appropriate and effective time to treat weeds is during their growth cycle in September and October. Most pesticides products state this as a requirement of application in their safety data sheets and label instructions. In addition, WA has had the warmest and wettest winter and the hottest and driest summer on record. It is therefore entirely predictable that weed infestations in the town will be exacerbated, as they will be everywhere. Other local government authorities utilise steam treatment in March and April, and then in September and October to match the growth cycle of the weeds being targeted. This lack of regard for expert advice reflects poorly on senior executives at the town of Bassendean. The use of the City of Swan and the City of Bayswater as reference sites is not supported. These local governments are well known to be high users of pesticides and extremely dangerous ones at that, as well as being openly resistant to any calls by their community to move to steam and safer alternatives. The officer's report states that glyphosate was suspended because of the concerns about its carcinogenicity. This is incorrect. The issue of glyphosate impacts on our environment extend far beyond the World Health Organisation's classification. The issues discussed and raised at Town of Bassendean ordinary council meetings over numerous years have included spray and vapour drift impacts on vulnerable citizens in our community, children, babies in utero, and community members with cancer and compromised immune systems. Spray and vapour drift impacts on groundwater, wetlands, and the Swan River. 3. The long-term cumulative impacts of pesticides, especially glyphosate-based herbicides, on the environment, especially in natural areas. 4. The long-term impact on worker health. 5. The unaccounted and externalised costs to ratepayers in terms of compromised health, environmental impacts, and issues such as biodiversity loss. Let's not forget that glyphosate kills bees and other insects. 6, the strong community desire for safer, healthy environment expressed through petitions and numerous deputations, questions and statements to council, and of course the many council motions unanimously supported over a number of years to move to safer, more effective weed management. The officer report states that a 12-month study was undertaken which identified significant limitations. This is incorrect. The photographic documentation of a small section of hard surfaces treated did not identify significant limitations, but in fact stated that steam had worked well, except for 2 types of weeds. These 2 weed species are well known to also not respond well to glyphosate or pesticides. The question here is, who initiated and designed the review of steam weed management in our town and why? I'll move on to integrated pest management. The officer's report claims that the town of Bassendean implements an integrated pest management system. I strongly dispute this and find no evidence that the town of Bassendean upholds the principles of integrated pest management, whereby the precautionary principle, forward planning and monitoring is undertaken. Integrated pest management is far more than weed treatment. and refers to a whole systems approach where prevention is recognised as the first step in addressing weed and pest management. The town of Bassendean continues to spread weed seed prolifically through our town via mowing practices. The town of Bassendean refuses to acknowledge or address this problem. Instead, the burden of this impact is now carried by our community's public health and environment through toxic chemical applications in our immediate environment and natural areas. Use of glyphosate. I'm deeply disturbed to see the officer mention the use of permits in the officer's report to council. Many of the chemicals that are identified on permits, such as permit 13333, are highly toxic pesticides that are banned all over the world. And yet they can be used via a permit in pretty much anywhere in the urban environment. Theme weed monitoring. I dispute the officer's claim that weeds have become worse in natural areas, especially in Success Hill Reserve.
Jane, I'm going to have to wind you up shortly.
Okay. Photographic evidence taken by Friends of Success Hill since the town suspended the use of Fusilade 4 demonstrates that this is untrue. Similarly, to completely ignore the expressed wishes of the traditional owners who we work with is offensive and cannot be supported. They have repeatedly stated to the town of Bassendean that they do not want pesticides used on their sacred site and sacred freshwater streams. I refer to the debacle of the umbrella papyrus that destroyed the spillway at Success Hill Reserve and will now cost ratepayers hundreds of thousands of dollars to repair. This could have been completely avoided. But instead, glyphosate herbicide was sprayed on that weed and it grew so out of control, it broke the spillway. The rocket study demonstrates that Fusilade 4 does not act as the manufacturer claims and in fact harms native species. Why would we want to use this again? The officer proposes 10 years of weed spraying with class 6 poison at $30,000 to $50,000 a year. These funds could provide significant alternative weed control. Cost. I've just about finished, Catherine. 30 more seconds. Cost. I dispute the officer claims about cost as it ignores the externalised costs of pesticide applications to our health and environment, which I've alluded to already. Finally, the important questions here. The town of Bassendean continues to use the same contractors they have used for decades. I request and urge councillors to reject the officer's recommendations in full. I urge councillors to ensure that full public engagement in relation to this policy and all policies are undertaken by the town of Bassendean, as is identified in the Department of Health guidelines.
Jane, I think we should finish it there so that councillors have the opportunity to ask you questions. Are you willing to take questions?
Absolutely, but I've got two quick sentences to make and I'm finished. I think given the lengthy time you allowed for public question time, which really wasn't questions, which really was statements, okay, I've gone to the trouble of making a deputation. Jane, I think I should be awarded that kind of respect.
Jane, I will allow you to continue on the basis that you take care not to potentially defame contractors or workers or what have you. I've asked you to take care. It was a recorded meeting and I would ask you to refrain from that. So you may finish your last couple of points, but please remember this is a recorded meeting that is going to be publicly available.
Absolutely noted. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would ask that the councillors support the ongoing non-chemical ecological restoration work that volunteers in our town have been contributing for the benefit of everybody. They need our support. I would urge the councillors to actually put a motion forward to completely prohibit the use of glyphosate-based herbicides on all hard surfaces in our town. And finally, support science. We have scientists in our community and in our town, scientists like Professor Giles Hardy that has warned that spraying around the flooded going around is killing these trees. We have a recent hydrogeological report on the Ashfield Flats that alludes to the pollution load there. And we have a recent Melbourne study that shows that our rivers and wetlands all throughout Melbourne are full of the more toxic metabolite of glyphosate, AMPA. We should not ignore those. So thank you for allowing me to give this deputation, and I'm happy to take questions.
So Councillor Carter, I think you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Jane, for a very thoughtful and well expressed deputation. I had a meeting today with the Mayor and Nicole to look about certainly the issue of spraying near playgrounds and where children gather, and also the wetlands. I think that there's work to be done in this space. I've asked for my motion to go forward in April. I'm hoping that we won't move away from what we were doing now to something more inclusive of sides. So I think that we've still got a lot of way as councillors to find our way through.
Councillor Carter, could you
And
go through a question, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So my question, Jane, is to where do you see us going now? If we are not keen to increase our use of herbicides, how do we move forward now? I'd be interested in what in the pathways that you can suggest.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. I think that the way forward is to uphold the existing legislation and policies that exist that enshrine the public right to know and full civic engagement in these kinds of policies. So the first thing council needs to do is to hold full public engagement. But in terms of weed management, steam weeding does work, and that's why the City of Stirling has suspended all pesticide use and is pursuing steam, because they see that it works and they understand, they listen to the experts, they understand that steam weeding has to be done differently to chemical spraying. It is not a straight swap. So if you apply a steam weed approach as if you are applying a chemical approach, you are likely to not succeed. Steam weeding takes at least 3 years to become successful, but then over that time, the costs reduce. So that's why in the long term, steam weeding and non-chemical ecological restoration techniques save councils money, because you're not forking out those chemical contracts. There are many, many ways to manage weeds in the environment. We need to acknowledge an integrated pest management approach that puts precaution first, but certainly steam, hand weeding, mechanical and safer substitutes. The officer could have very easily recommended a safer product substitute, but chose not to, chose to reinstate glyphosate. I'm at a loss to understand why.
Thank you, Ms. Bremer. Councillor Carter, would you be able to put your hand down? I don't seem to be able, thank you, I don't seem to be able to do it on my end. Councillors, could I remind you that this is for councillors, a question forum where we ask questions. So if we can refrain from making statements, that would be excellent. Are there any other councillors who would like to ask Ms. Bremer a question? And I can't see any other hands going up. So, Ms. Bremer, I think that thank you for your deputation, and I'm sure that councillors will have some questions to ask on this item when we get to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Before I go, I'm just aware that a number of statements were sent to me by the public that don't appear to have been read out at the beginning. So after the meeting, would you mind checking that? Because I think there are quite a few statements that are missing. Thanks.
Certainly, I'll converse with the CEO on that one. Thank you. Okay, so with that, we will move on to agenda items. I do have a question for Ms. Mabs or the officers. Ms. Bremer has presented a deputation. Does Ms. Bremer exit the meeting now, or is she permitted to stay in the meeting?
She's able to. The meeting will be up. The meeting will be uploaded. Sorry, the meeting will be uploaded tomorrow.
Yep.
Her role in the meeting ceases at the end of the deputation, and it's now. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so we'll move on to reports. 8.1, which is the Bassendean Oval business case. Mr. Gibson, would you like to speak to this item?
Through you, Madam Mayor, if you'd like, if it will assist councillors, there could be value in bringing forward item 8.4, given the deputation that just occurred.
Yes, we can do that. So we can go straight to 8.4, which is the review of streetscape weed management. So Ms. Nicole Davey, would you like to speak to this?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. So I'll just run through a brief summary of what's in the report and why we have arrived at the officer recommendation. So steam weeding is currently undertaken on all weeds growing in hard stand areas of the streetscape. So that includes footpaths, road curbs, any concrete or paved medians or pedestrian areas. And steam is used due to, originally it was a 2016 council resolution to suspend the use of glyphosate on hard surfaces in the urban environment. So the reason that I've found from the minutes of the 2016 meetings was due to the concern about the potential cancer risk. At the time, a review was underway by the APVMA, so they're the authority responsible for authorising the sale of pesticides in Australia. So they completed their review in 2016 and they concluded that exposure to glyphosate does not pose a carcinogenic risk to humans. And their position remains consistent now. There was an item that went to council in 2017 that sought to rescind the previous suspension. However, that wasn't supported and council decided to instead uphold the previous suspension. So the 12-month monitoring assessment was undertaken from July of 2020 to June of 2021, and that's shown in attachment 3A. So it did indicate a limited effectiveness of steam. So seedlings and weeds without any storage structures were controlled. However, grasses with rhizomes, clumping grasses and plants with taproots regrew. So only the section above the ground was controlled and the roots remained alive and regrew quickly. So Tier 1 sites, which are Guildford Road and Collier Road, they are treated monthly for 5 months between, just check. April to August, and even with the monthly applications, the regrowth of the weeds was still shown. So the limited effectiveness has resulted in additional weed seeds moving into adjacent areas of parks. So the comment in the report about successful reserve is just relating to the grassed area, not the natural area. So as a result of that, there's been a requirement to apply additional herbicides in the parks, so selective herbicides to control the weed seeds that have blown in from the roads. And in other locations, there are weeds that can't be controlled with herbicides, so the turf has to be mown really low to try and prevent the weeds from growing, which results in a requirement for increased watering. to help the grass survive. There's also been issues with roads. So, for example, at Watson Street, grass has grown into the road and cracked the asphalt, and that damages the water-resistant layer, which will reduce the life of the road as it allows water to infiltrate. So there are specific examples of where there have been problems because the weeds haven't been controlled by the steam. So that was the reason for the recommendation, is due to the limited effectiveness of steam, and also that the original documented reason for why the suspension was placed having been addressed. So if you look in the attachments, on page 197 is attachment B. First 2 pages show the current weed management practices, and then from page 199 onwards show what we are recommending as an alternative. So with the alternative, in any case, we'll be continuing with the steam until the end of June. So that's going to be a 3-month period to advise the community and also promote the no spray list. That's assuming it is rescinded. So the proposal, should council decide to rescind the suspension, would be that the areas, I don't know if you've got the map in red, would continue to be treated with steam. So they are locations around schools, childcare centres and highly pedestrian areas such as Old Perth Road. So they would be treated by steam 5 times per year. And then the remaining areas will be treated with Roundup Bioactive 3 times per year, with the aim to try and reduce that. Because of the high weed burden, our recommendation is that 3 times per year would be required initially, which could be reduced down in the future. Business owners and residents could register for the verge adjacent to their property to remain untreated with herbicides. So that would apply only to the hard surfaces, because the resident is responsible for maintaining the open area on the verge. So if they register for the list, that location, their verge, so any footpaths or curb edges would not be treated with herbicides, but they would have to agree to maintain it in a weed-free condition. So some of the ongoing trials that we're looking at are electric weeding. So there's a trial coming up in Perth in the next few months, and we've nominated some sites for them to consider undertaking in Bassendean. There's also, if glyphosate were to be used, there's also other measures to be put in place, like use of shrouds on the equipment that applies it. There's also new units that claim to detect the weeds automatically through sensing the chlorophyll. And also they have GPS markers to confirm and identify where the no spray list sites are. Yeah, in summary, that's why we are recommending an alternative weed control method for streetscapes. The other comment would just be relating to Guildford Road median. So at the moment, the town maintains the median, which is usually a responsibility of Main Roads WA, and that's due to the council's wish to avoid the use of herbicides in paved areas. So should the amended strategy be approved and go ahead, we would then seek for Main Roads to take back over that maintenance.
Thank you, Ms Davies. Councillors, may I ask who would like to ask questions? No one. Okay, that's interesting. Sorry. Renee.
Sorry, I can't.
Councillor McLean.
Just a couple of questions. When Ms Bremer was giving her deputation, she made a comment about safer substitutes that may be recommended. From conversations that you have had with councillors previously, I was of the understanding that there was not really many safer substances that could be substituted. Would that be your understanding?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that's correct. So a lot of the organic type herbicides work a similar way to steam, and they're contact herbicides that only affect the parts of the plant that it's actually in contact with. And then there's other types of herbicides where there's other issues, like there's odours and also risk of burns and skin irritation to the operators. So I'm not aware of any other local government using a different type of herbicide or apart from glyphosate for streetscapes, no.
And can I also ask, there's been mention about some other local governments that have adopted steam widely. So I think City of Stirling's one that's been mentioned, Subiaco. From the working group that you're on that looks at weed strategies across local governments, have you had any feedback from them about their methodology of using steam and whether they've had more success than we've managed to have?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I would have to probably take that question on notice. I know that the working group, so WALGA, are compiling information at the moment on all the different practices of local government. I haven't heard anything directly from them about that, but something I can look into.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Ames, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to reiterate Councillor McLennan's questions, but also to reinforce, yes, Ms Davies, if we can get that information from other local councils regarding their overall use of steam, I think that will be very appropriate for our way moving forward for making our decisions next week. So thank you very much.
And before I get to you, Councillor Polifka, Ms Mads, I see your hand going on and off occasionally. I was wondering if you have something to contribute at the moment.
No, I apologise for that.
Okay. It's just come on and off twice now, so I was wondering, that was a bit unusual. Councillor Polifka. Thank you, Councillor Ames, by the way, sorry.
Yep, there we go. That's working now. Yeah, well, a question relates to cost. So I suppose we'll talk about what it costs to treat a square metre of weed affected area. If we just get a comparison of the cost for, because I think 3 separate methods were mentioned by, well, combination of administration and in the deputation, which was essentially the chemical that's currently being used, steam weeding, or I think manual removal. So just if we could get a rough estimate of what it costs per square metre to use each of those treatments.
Through you, Madam Mayor, it might be more relevant to compare the linear metre cost for a streetscape.
I'm happy with that.
I would have to collate the figures, yeah, but we can provide that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I actually have a couple of questions, if you don't mind. There's been mention, both in the deputation, that there's some weeds that are glyphosate resistant, and I'm assuming that might relate to fleabane. And I was wondering if the officer could give me a little bit of feedback on that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Sorry, that's another one I'll have to refer back to our conservation officer on. She's got more detailed technical knowledge and get back to you. I'm aware that some grass species are becoming resistant. I'd have to check about fleabane.
Okay. Well, a subsequent question, which may also relate to that, is if these varieties are resistant to glyphosate and potentially steam, it seems to me that there's been a couple of specimens mentioned that might be resistant to a whole range of measures. Can I ask, apart from the electric shock treatment that you're looking at for the future, is there anything else that is evolving that might become effective?
Through you, Madam Mayor, not that I'm aware of, not currently.
Okay. Last question. The seed bank, the distribution of weed seeds is obviously the major problem, having read the report. And I was just wondering if the staff have any idea of, over the last 3 years whilst we've been using steam weeding, if they have any idea whatsoever about what they believe that seed bank may have increased by, if indeed it has increased at all.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't believe we can really estimate a percentage or increase. We can just provide information on how much additional weed control has been required. So I think, for example, there's now 2 applications required of Jolt rather than 1 in those reserves that are mentioned in the report.
Okay. Thank you for that. Councillor Ames, are you wishing to ask a question, or is your hand still up from last time?
Sorry, Madam Mayor, slip of the hand is going down. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I have Councillor McLennan wishing to ask a question.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Ms Davies, I don't expect that you'll have this information at hand, but one of the concerns that I've heard members of the community raise is about the number of countries that have apparently banned glyphosate use. I'm just wondering whether we can get any information on whether that's all based upon the original report that prompted the town of Bassendean's decision, or whether there's been subsequent information that they've looked at that have caused them to make that decision with the national bans.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I do have some information on the status of some of those bans, which might provide some context. So, for example, in Austria, a ban was written but was not signed into law. It's been tabled. In Belgium, there's been a ban for home use, except for Brussels, where it's also banned for local government. In Canada, there's no state bans, but some province restrictions. Denmark, it's quite specific. It's banned only on post-emergent crops. France is banned with exemptions for many farmers. Germany is aiming to ban it by 2024. And the Netherlands, it's banned at home. So a lot of the restrictions and bans are related to home use in home gardens. I think because of concerns that people aren't using PPE if they're using it in their home. So that's the information I have on that current information. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have one last question, if you don't mind, Ms Davies. In the attachments, page 1, it indicates that hard surfaces, roads, curbs and footpath weed control, you're looking at a continuous improvement action. There was a small reference to heavily planting medians with ground cover to A, reduce the overall volume of hard surfaces, and B, reduce weeds. But it was a very minor reference in all the other material that was in that attachment. And I'm wondering if there is any anticipation on the part of the administration to perhaps increase those sort of plantings that may in fact eventually reduce the hard surfaces as stated in the sentence, but also crowd out the weeds eventually so that we don't have to use chemical sprays or steam weeding.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think we would have to assess suitable locations and whether it would be feasible, especially initially while the plants are being established. There would be an increased requirement for weed control, and we would have to consider aspects such as, is there water available for irrigation, how well will the plants survive, and suitability of like a soil volume for them to grow as well.
I would assume that those assessments are made, for instance, when we planted trees down the middle of Shackleton Street. I'm assuming those assessments are made when we're putting in new road infrastructure. I guess the question I'm asking is whether there could be a greater emphasis on planting out medians rather than just installing hard surfaces, which eventually are subject to, when you have weed infestations in these hard surfaces, it actually deteriorates the hard surfaces. So I think what I'm asking is, would the administration consider putting more emphasis on that sort of long-term solution, for lack of a better word.
Can I just clarify, do you mean in existing garden bed or open medians, or converting paved medians to planted areas?
Councillors, previous council have, obviously some of those councillors are no longer here, but there have been discussions in the past with councillors about how we can reduce hard surfaces in the town, and you know, it was a comment that jumped out of me from the page, so that's why I'm asking the question, but I won't labour the point. We'll move on. Thank you. Now, councillors, if there are no other questions, we will go back to the first item, which was 8.1 Bassendean Oval business case. So, Mr. Gibson, would you like to speak to this?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This report is for Council to consider its involvement with the Bassendean Oval business case project and decide whether it should, whether or not it should discontinue the project. As you can see from the report, the project started almost 5 years ago and has effectively been made redundant by virtue of the recent Bassendean Town Centre Master Plan, which provides for a meaningfully different development outcome than was contemplated by the business case project. As such, it is recommended that the project be ceased and the unspent funds, which are in the vicinity of $30,000, be returned to the funding partners, which are set out in the report. From there, the town can continue to work with the football club on the potential future redevelopment of Bassendean Oval site in accordance with the council adopted master plan.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Councillors, Councillor McLennan?
Thanks for that, Mr. Gibson. Just two questions. Firstly, has there been a conversation with the football club about this proposal to cease the business case, and is that something that they're supportive of?
Through you, Madam Mayor, there's been a couple of conversations with the CEO there, and yeah, they understand the situation we've arrived at with the business case effectively being overtaken by the master plan, to the point that the business case has no future. So yeah, the club is understanding of the situation.
And just following on from that, you mentioned the town centre master plan. So when we were consulting on the town centre master plan, the club gave us feedback about their preferred alignment of the oval and so on. And since that time, there'd been some change in opinion from the club, so that we can finalise the master plan and move forward so that this doesn't just stagnate. Have we got anywhere further with the club about a finalised alignment of the oval?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I suppose the master plan has been adopted, but I suppose since that time, the club has sort of communicated its willingness to talk about a potentially different outcome on Bassendean Oval, whereby facilities could be consolidated at the western end potentially. I suppose we're in discussions with the club about what that might look like, and if that is something we're able to support going forward, it's something we'd bring to council under the guise of a minor amendment to the adopted master plan.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Polifka and then Councillor Ames.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to Mr. Gibson. So you mentioned that the club understood the town's position. Are they in agreement with us stepping away from this process? I mean, have they expressed a view one way or the other?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think I think it'd be fair to say they support the cessation of the 2017 business case project. Obviously, the club is very, very keen to talk to the town and others about redevelopment of Bassendean Oval as guided by the master plan, but certainly understand that the 2017 project, which sort of predated the master plan project by 3 or 4 years, has reached the end of its useful life, and there is really no other option but to cease it. But again, reiterate the fact that they are very keen to look at avenues for redeveloping Bassendean Oval in accordance with the master plan.
And so this money that we're looking to return came in from a number of different sources. Did that money have a specific purpose, or is it possible to argue that the purpose was sufficiently wide that, given that the landscape has now changed as a result of the master plan, that money could be redeployed to enable the club to reconsider an alternate business case in that changed landscape?
Through you, Madam Mayor, as I understand it, the money was provided to the town for the specific purpose of the business case, a project which hasn't had any meaningful action or progress for a couple of years, for obvious reasons, in light of the master plan. But it would certainly be open to the town and or the club to, in returning the money or in offering to return the money, to potentially request that it be redeployed or redirected to the football club for the purpose of undertaking some other body of work.
Yeah, no, that would be a great outcome if that's something which you can facilitate. So certainly, thanks for that.
Councillor Polifka, you faded out there at the end, but I think you.
I was just saying it's a good idea, and I mean, if we can ask for that money to be for the advantage of the football club going forward, that would be great. So we'll see what we can do.
Thank you, Councillor Ames.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to Mr. Gibson, I'd just like to reiterate the questions and statements from Councillor McLennan and Councillor Polifka. I think it'd be great for the funds to be redeployed in a way that is still of advantage to not only the club but the sporting precinct, whether that is an opportunity for different types of engagements within the area, whether it is community groups or other types of sporting associations. So I'd love to see some more information about how those funds can be redistributed in and around the current business case, outside potentially of the master plan. But my main question to you, Mr. Gibson, is there's a comment within the report stating that council's disengagement from the project could be interpreted as the town having little interest in the future redevelopment aspirations of the SDFC. That is not the case, and while the town development focus will be appropriately on town-owned or town-managed sites, the town will continue to assist the club where possible. Obviously, through our verbal conversations that are on record this evening, is there a way in which this particular agenda item, if it does go through with the officer recommendation, that there is something written to say that the town will still be focusing on the appropriate redevelopment within that Swan District precinct?
Through Madam Mayor, I suppose the report says exactly that in the risk management implications. If council wanted to really to strengthen that position, it could add a point to the resolution, which effectively formalises it and stakes its claim and states in no uncertain terms that the council will support the club in its endeavours to redevelop the site in accordance with the master plan. Some words of that nature could be drafted up pretty easily.
I think that would be very handy, and maybe directed to you, Peter, through you, Madam Mayor, maybe like a media statement regarding the closure of the business case, but with the town's full support of the redevelopment of that sporting precinct. I think that would be something that might be advantageous to the town, to the council, and maybe to the residents that are obviously seeking a lot of redevelopment within that sporting precinct.
Through Madam Mayor, yes, we can do some words up for council's consideration.
Thank you, that's all.
Councillor McWilliam.
Yes, Madam Mayor, I've been trying to take my hand down, but it's not letting me do that. So I just, anything I was going to ask has been covered. Thank you very much.
Okay, so, and it's not letting you take your hand down, is it, Councillor McWilliam? Ah, there we go. I have a question for Mr. Gibson, or for the CEO actually. The Basteen Oval business case, would there be any opportunity along the lines of what other questions other councillors have asked to utilise the balance of the funding, that is 33,000, to scope out the types of sports that could coexist at the Oval with Swan District's Football Club? And the reason I ask this is to potentially augment the likelihood of attracting funding from not only state but federal. I'm wondering if that is something that the administration have considered.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I suppose short answer would be no. The funding was provided to the town for a specific purpose. That purpose, if council resolves as such, will have ceased, and it would seem appropriate to return the funds to the sources. However, going on from Councillor Politica's point, in offering to return the funds, the town could certainly advocate and perhaps request that that the three funding authorities, one of which is the Football Commission, agrees to relinquish the funds with them going to the football club, perhaps, so the football club can use it to prepare a subsequent business case that is in accordance with the council adopted master plan. That request can be made. There's no guarantee that the funding bodies would acquiesce, but the question can be asked.
Just going further on with that, if you don't mind, Mr. Gibson, just humouring me for a minute. In the past, we have spoken about the ability of co-locating sporting groups and facilities and things like that. So I guess my question is, if a scoping document was prepared which demonstrated that other sports could harmoniously coexist at the Oval with Swan Districts and their utilisation of the Oval, would that potentially open up the doors to more funding? I think that's where I'm coming from with this, whether there's any potential there to enhance the attractiveness of funding for that area.
Through you, Madam Mayor, so I suppose I'd say broadly, the more functions that can be accommodated on the reserve, and that's not necessarily limited to the playing surface, that's the reserve more broadly, which includes the surrounding bund and the buildings, etc. The more functions and uses that can be accommodated on site, naturally the implication would be you've increased the potential sources of funding. So I'd say yes.
Okay, thank you for that. I think specifically what I was interested in was, for instance, could a running track exist around the perimeter of the playing surface, and how would that work? Could it work? So these are the types of questions I have, and I'm guessing that if I have those questions, then perhaps others would have those questions, and whether that could be developed into a proposal. So that's where I'm coming from. But anyway, enough, unless there's any other councillor who wishes to ask a question on this item, we will move on. And I can't see any hands up. So we'll move on to the next item, which is 8.2, where I will invite the Deputy Mayor to preside over the meeting for this particular item, which is the draft rights of way strategy, where I have a proximity interest. So thank you very much, everyone.
So, Mr. Gibson, is this you, or have we got Ms. Shaw with us this evening?
This is me, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Are you happy to speak to it?
Probably just a question for the CEO or Ms. Kanya as to the proper process in terms of Councillor Hamilton's absence or otherwise.
My understanding is that she's being removed from the meeting and then added in again later. That's what was discussed earlier. Is that still the plan?
I'm just removed Councillor Hamilton from the meeting.
Thank you.
If you'd like, Madam Deputy Mayor, sorry, I can give a brief introduction.
That would be fabulous. Thank you.
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, this report is obviously asking Council to consider adopting the draft right-of-way strategy. The town has undertaken a review of the rights of way within the district and prepared a draft strategy to guide future decisions on each individual right-of-way, with the various options broadly being closure and sale or retention and upgrading. The draft strategy was considered by Council in August 2021 and thereafter advertised for public comment. In response, the town received a number of submissions, with a disproportionate number of those relating to rights of way 4 and 5. I think those two rights of way accounted for about 45% of all the submissions. So most of the interest was limited to 2 particular sites. In response to those submissions and a further review of the existing structures and approval on site, staff have recommended that 4 of the recommendations be modified, and they relate to rights of way 1, 4, 5 and 16. And the changes are summarised on page 15 of the agenda. It's recommended that Council adopt the draft strategy as modified after advertising and attached to the agenda, so as to provide direction on the ongoing use and management of rights of way in the district. It is further recommended to Council that it revoke 2 existing Council policies, being Council Policy 1.6 and 1.20, which offer very little decision-making guidance. But happy to take questions.
Thank you for that. Councillors, any questions for Mr. Gibson? Councillor Polifka?
Oh, great. Thank you. My question relates to that colourful map that's been attached at page 48 of the attachments. Do you have that before you?
I do, Councillor, thank you.
Now, my question relates to, so you have running from, well, essentially Walter Road East down to the railway track. You've got a laneway comprised of sections 1 and 3, and then to the right of that, you've got another laneway comprised of sections 2 and 4. Now, my questions relate to that area. Was there any specific reason why each of those break rather than extending the entire length from the railway through to Walter Road East? So where you've got the red section, that's for closure. I was just wondering why each of them closes such that neither of them spans that entire distance.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, is the question effectively why are there different treatments for different sections of each right of way?
No, I was wondering, was it a deliberate intention to ensure that there wasn't a laneway which extended the entire distance from the railway through to Walter Road East, or was that a function of other considerations and it's just a coincidence that each of them doesn't extend that entire distance?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, it's certainly the latter. Had the conditions on site and the widths and the abutting development been such that they were more appropriate to retain and upgrade, that is what the recommendation would have been. There was no presumption against having a right of way that ran for a considerable distance. There's no great concerns with that necessarily, because through our local planning policy, you can put controls in place to ensure that desirable development occurs abutting it. Traffic is managed through chicanes, speed bumps, other hard treatments, and surveillance can be assured through those design controls. So, yeah, certainly not a conscious decision to break up long sections, but more of a response to the particulars on site.
And just relating to that area there, is that area there we've got well, the different streets through there, are they ones which would be considered transit corridors? So any of the roads which run parallel to sections 1 and 3 and 2 and 4? So that the roads which run parallel, are either of those ones which are considered in planning to be transit corridors?
Through Madam Mayor, yes. So the transit corridor that is identified along Ivanhoe Street, running north-south, the way the sub-regional framework maps the transit corridors is effectively a 200-metre offset either way. So it certainly captures at least one of the, it captures the right-of-way that is west of First Ave. So that would be right-of-way 1 and 3.
Okay, and in terms of those transit corridors, those are areas where higher density is generally encouraged. Is it the situation that, I'm not saying through the current local planning scheme, but perhaps at a local planning scheme at some point in the future, where we might see higher density along, which would encompass what's currently that laneway?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I suppose that is, I suppose, the position that the department and the state is adopting through the sub-regional framework. I suppose from a local point of view, there didn't seem to be a great deal of support for that in Bassendean, with the preference, the clear preference being for the development intensity to be contained within and around the town centre. And if you look at the sub-regional framework, the Ivanhoe corridor takes in a lot of land that would be considered more suburban. So that is something that will have to be considered as part of the draft local planning strategy and associated LPS 11, because certainly the department's view would be that there should at least be investigations into the corridors accommodating some intensification. How that fits in with Bassendean obviously needs to be assessed.
Yeah, so just future proofing it so that if we were saddled with that planning treatment, which was contrary to the wishes expressed through the Bassendean project. So I mean, if there were that increased density in that location, would the retention of a laneway be something which would be advantageous to potentially reduce crossovers and the like onto what would, if they're identified as transit corridors, be presumably increasingly busy roads?
Through Madam Deputy, potentially. I suppose it all depends on the intended built form outcomes, because obviously there's different crossover and access requirements when you compare a single house to a terrace house to group dwellings that are sort of one behind the other, compared to apartments. So each sort of housing typology generates a different requirement for access. So, but certainly in some of those typologies, having a rear access way would reduce crossovers to the primary street.
Okay, excellent. Thanks for that detailed discussion.
All right, Councillor Wilding.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I've got a couple of questions for Mr. Gibson. The first one's just about our consultation process. So we go out to residents, we ask for these submissions on this item. Do we contact residents to let them know that the item's actually coming to council and being discussed?
Madam Deputy Mayor, yes, we do.
Awesome, thank you. The other question I had was regarding right-of-way 5. With conversations with residents, there's been sort of a desire to close right-of-way 5 sooner rather than later. So I note that the recommendation is that it's closed sort of contingent to the development of that Scadden Street property. Right-of-way 4 is closed partially, so we've kept part of it open, proposed to keep part of it open and close the rest. Is there any option to close right-of-way 5 just past the point of that property so that there's still a small portion that remains open for that one property to use and then the rest of it can be closed, if that makes sense?
It does, through Madam Deputy Mayor. The short answer is yes. I suppose the reference to the matter being sort of delayed or grandfathered out in terms of the access for the garage and the caravan, that was more in reference to if the town was going to be proactively doing something. However, if a group of, I suppose, how many landowners, to say there's 20 landowners located between number 62 and Alancy, if they came in with a proposal to close their section, which is effectively 80% of the right of way, and left the balance 20% until number 62 redeveloped, there's certainly no issue with that.
Fantastic, thank you.
And Councillor Ames.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, and through you to Mr. Gibson. Yeah, I'd like to, I suppose, reiterate Councillor Wilding's suggestion of those areas that are deemed for full closure to have partial closure if there's agreements with the residents. So that's great to hear. My question is, though, on the attachment on page 12, the closure process, obviously there states a few dot points there. My question is, if a right-of-way is closed, what are the infrastructure installments that would be installed by the town to close a lane? And then what happens if there are landowners that don't require or don't want that portion of land, and how that particular, I suppose, situation is dealt with? So let's just use row 5, for example. If that was a full closure from Penzance to Ilanthi, what hard infrastructure would be installed in that right-of-way so that that right-of-way is closed? Unless I'm missing something in the attachments, that's my question.
Through Madam Deputy Mayor, where there's a proposal to close a right-of-way fully or partially, so if we say for right-of-way 5, for argument's sake, and just for the purpose of the discussion, so the whole thing was going to be closed for simplicity, the closure process would require all of the owners to purchase a portion of the right-of-way. The department is unlikely to support any process or proposal that leaves random bits of land unaccounted for. So there would need to be a consolidated proposal submitted by the landowner group to show how the land was effectively going to be apportioned amongst them. That could be as easy as everyone takes from their back fence to the midpoint of the right-of-way and everyone goes half all the way down. Or some landowners may not be interested, but the opposing landowner across the way is happy to take the whole lot. So that's really a matter for the landowners to come up with a consolidated plan about how 100% of the right-of-way is going to be apportioned. And once, if that all stacks up and it runs its course and the right-of-way is closed and the land is effectively apportioned to the abutting sites by way of an amalgamation, the hard infrastructure you would expect to find would be realignment of the fences.
No dramas at all, and that would be what, just like your neighbourhood friendly hardy, or your neighbourhood friendly aluminium fencing that is pretty common in fencing in today's fencing world.
Through Madam Deputy Mayor, quite possibly we have a fencing local law that deals with sufficient fencing. It may well be as straightforward as the existing fence being one of the existing fences being moved to the new alignment. But again, fencing is a civil matter between abutting landowners, and it's not something the town would sort of concern itself with.
Sure thing. And just follow.
Sorry, Councillor Aves, just before we go on, you mentioned if there's 100% agreement between the owners, what's the situation if you don't get that 100% agreement?
Well, that was going to be my next question.
Oh, sorry.
That was going to be my next question, correct.
Through Madam Deputy Mayor, not much. Typically, the department would be wanting to see a proposal that accounts for 100% of the right-of-way. It does not want any random bits of right-of-way that would otherwise be isolated from the rest of the road network. So it does put the onus on landowners to come up with an agreed proposal.
And,
sorry for cutting you off, Councillor Ames.
No, that's okay. And great minds think alike, Deputy Mayor, which is awesome. What about the scenario of adverse possession? Would that come into play in this particular situation, Mr. Gibson?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, potentially, and I suppose again that is a matter for landowners to progress if they think they have a genuine claim. There's information on adverse possession on the top of page 12, and obviously it needs to be run through either Landgate or by commencing proceedings in the Supreme Court. So there may well be individuals out there that think they have a genuine claim to adverse possession, but that's not something that the town would be involved in typically, and it's not considered to fetter council's decision making around this right-of-way strategy.
No problems. Thanks for, again, some detailed responses. Thanks, Mr. Gibson.
Other councillors don't have questions, so I'll just have a couple for you. Mr. Gibson, in the report, you made reference to it being open to council to consider amending the strategy to provide for vegetation in the rights of ways. I'm just wondering how that would work and at what stage that would be introduced, and where you were referring to when you made that comment in the report.
Through you, Madam Mayor, is that in the financial considerations section you're referring to?
I'm not sure because I copied the text and put it in my questions.
I'll butt in. Yes, absolutely. That's on page number 17.
Yes, that's correct.
Through Madam Mayor, I suppose given it was an option that we had sort of considered internally, and thinking it through, it probably wasn't necessarily the best option, whilst it would, in a positive sense, increase canopy cover and green space and shade, particularly for people's backyards that backed onto the right-of-way. It would come with other challenges, particularly if there was subterranean infrastructure involved and pipes could potentially be compromised. You'd still need to have some sort of decision made regarding access at either or both ends. So it wasn't, whilst it was considered, it wasn't considered an appropriate response at the end of the day. However, we did obviously acknowledge it in the financial considerations should council want to pursue that. But we think it would be more appropriate to actually, if the rights of way weren't going to be used for access and traffic purposes, it would be best to actually have them incorporated into abutting sites. If those abutting sites, as a result, were able to achieve development potential they otherwise didn't have, or simply increase it, our LPP 13 would be the mechanism for increasing canopy cover. So we thought, on balance, the most appropriate approach would be to continue on broadly as drafted, in that we wouldn't seek to plant out any rights of way as a sort of a canopy corridor.
Thank you. You also make reference in the report to the previous decision to not cede land for the rights of ways, and then make the comment that potentially, let me find it, that the DPLH may not approve the formalisation of the narrow rights of ways. Is that something that we would find out at the stage when we approached the department with a proposal to upgrade a right of way, or at what stage would we find out whether that was going to be an issue?
Through Madam Deputy Mayor, it would be as we engage with the department on the dedication. So any upgrades, so sort of roadworks and that sort of thing, hard infrastructure, the department need not be involved. That'd be I suppose a civil work from the town's point of view. But for those rights of way that are less than 6 metres or less than 5 metres, we would probably need to actually prepare a design of the actual infrastructure outcome as a means of justifying to the department why an under-width right-of-way should be dedicated. So it would be as part of that dedication process, but it would need to be supported by some design work.
Okay, and one final question. You also made mention of the potential for the development of a local planning policy. Can you just outline for us maybe why we would want to pursue that, and if it's something that you would recommend to council?
Through Madam Deputy Mayor, I'd certainly recommend it. If there's going to be any rights of way that are retained, and the recommendation is that there are a number, that the policy would be used to guide future development outcomes abutting that right of way, and that would deal with those things that I mentioned a couple of questions ago about sort of development interface, road access, surveillance gates, and also probably goes to the relatively important issue of developer contributions towards the rights of way, because in many cases the rights of way are not in a normal trafficable condition and require significant upgrade. So it would be open to council through that draft local planning policy to incorporate provisions and associated fee structures to require contributions to the town-led upgrading of the abutting right of way.
Great, thank you. Now, there's no other hands up. Were there any further questions for Mr. Gibson? If not, maybe Libby or Yvonne, can I ask you to invite Councillor Hamilton back into the meeting?
Just calling her now.
Thank you.
And it looks like she's back in.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor McLennan, for presiding over that item. So I'm assuming we're moving on to the next item, which is 8.3, Draft Local Planning Policy Sustainable Development. And again, I think that would be Mr. Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is the council consider its policy settings in relation to sustainable development, specifically in relation to its two local planning policies, number 2 and 3. Staff have reviewed these policies as well as similar policies from other local governments and subsequently prepared a new consolidated draft LPP for council's consideration. And that is attached to the report. There is a slight error in the report at the bottom of page 21. It says the draft policy was circulated to councillors in the 18th of February CEO bulletin for comment, and that no responses were received. In actual fact, it was circulated to councillors in the 11th of February bulletin. But in any event, no comments were received, but that date error will be corrected in time for next Tuesday. Ultimately, it's recommended the council adopt the policy for the purposes of advertising, noting, of course, that it will have another opportunity to consider the matter following the consultation period.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. I see Councillor McWilliam has her hand up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Question for Mr. Gibson, clearly. I'm just wondering what information sessions and Q&A sessions would be facilitated for members of the public or the residents. And that's one question. And have staff costed the installation of rainwater, the potential cost of installation of rainwater tanks and upgrades to solar panels? Okay, I've written something else here in hieroglyphics which I can't read now. And whether the requirement to upgrade solar panels would also result in the need to replace current inverter systems.
Through Madam Mayor, we've been advised through the Switch Your Thinking program that the draft policy measures would add an additional cost to development, somewhere between 10 and 15,000. So 13,000 being about the midpoint of that, depending on the specifics of the case. So in terms of imposition of costs on development, this is that. I suppose it's important to acknowledge that the policy only applies to the high density code of split density coded properties, and in addition, council already has a local planning policy that puts most of these costs on the development, so it's not starting from scratch. It's just simply increasing some of the environmental performance mechanisms embedded in the policy, but certainly that's a consideration for council as to what costs it wants to burden developing landowners with. In terms of consultation with landowners, I suppose we would likely do up a, in addition to the sort of the normal consultation, as we tend to do, a FAQs sheet and an information sheet about the implications of the policy, and obviously provide sort of personalised responses if people want to give us a call, email, or come to the front counter, as the case may be. And we'd probably also, in terms of trying to get some greater input on the draft LPPs, seek to engage with various industry groups as well that would have an interest in the impacts of this policy, both from a sort of environmental performance point of view as well as a cost burden point of view.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Polifka, then Councillor McLennan.
Yes, thank you. I suppose my question's probably more of a procedural nature, so maybe we'll just go to the CEO herself. It's just in relation to a policy like this, where, I mean, obviously there wasn't too much of a response from councillors, and that may well be that other councillors share my view, is that we just want to seek information from the public as to what their feeling is about this matter. So whether the public is willing to incur those additional costs in order to achieve that sustainability. So I mean, the question is whether sustainability is something which is of such value to the community that it outweighs the immediate financial burden. Is there a way in which we can signal that that's the process, that's the reason why we've taken the process that we have, in that we're putting this out for advertising, not so much in that we've endorsed that, in that we're trying to gather that information from the community, so we know what sort of appetite they have towards what are good endeavours, but unfortunately are expensive endeavours.
Thanks, Councillor Polifka. Certainly with any policies or engagement strategy, if there are some specific questions that Council would like answered, we can certainly frame those questions in a way to try and elicit the appropriate response that will help inform your decision making.
Oh, okay, well that mechanism would be quite useful, so I may well devise some questions prior to the ordinary council meeting in relation to this. So yeah, thank you for providing that mechanism for I suppose gathering that information from our ratepayers. Certainly, thank you, and feel free to send anything through to officers if there's something specifically you'd like to know. Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor McLennan.
So thank you, Mr. Gibson, for answering my questions during the week and for following up about the City of Fremantle's policy. So I'm not sure if other councillors were aware, Mr. Gibson just followed up on City of Fremantle's policy and confirmed that there's applied in a similar manner to what's proposed here to only the higher density split coded sites. Is that accurate, Mr. Gibson? Yeah. So I was just seeking to understand whether you're aware of any other local governments that may apply some or all of these provisions more broadly across their local government area?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, aware the City of Vincent, through its built form policy, has provisions about environmental performance. That built form policy does apply to straight commercial, mixed use, residential at high density, lower density. So it's a very comprehensive policy that goes beyond the scope of our equivalent LPP 2 and 3. But certainly it has a provision regarding solar absorptance. You'll notice that's probably a new feature of our draft LPP at 6.1.2 there on page 2 of the policy. That's broadly modelled on the City of Vincent provision, but obviously amended to relate to our particular context from a heritage point of view. So, yeah, obviously the City of Fremantle has a policy not too dissimilar, and the City of Vincent, certainly their built form policy has, amongst other things, provisions about roof colour.
Okay, thank you.
Other councillors who'd like to ask questions? Otherwise, I've got a few questions. So, Mr. Gibson, just a couple of things. The energy efficiency checklist, you've indicated to have a higher score than 70 implemented. Is 70 the average, or is it higher than average? I'm just curious about what that rating, where it sits with other councils.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I don't know, but broadly it is the same as the existing policy setting. But that has proposed a change.
Okay. The other thing too, on page 21, there's a paragraph there that talks about the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage, and there's a comment there that split coding will remain for a time and likely then to be phased out. And I was really curious about that statement and whether you have any sort of idea of where the department are coming from on that and any sort of potential timelines on split codings being phased out.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, certainly have some insight into that. So in various meetings with the department over a protracted period of time, the town was advised that split density codings weren't particularly supported by the department, and that land should be zoned appropriately based on its locational characteristics, and that's a point that we certainly agree with the department. But of probably the last 2 or 3 months, the department has sort of provided advice to the town that it's where the existing split density coded areas overlap with the transit corridors, say, which were being referred to in the right of way item, where they overlap, the department's required approach is that the split densities remain in situ and remain unchanged until such time as the town does a subsequent body of work in the form of an investigation to determine what the density codes should actually be. So given that LPS 11 still has a fair journey to run, and the phasing out of the split density codes across the district will be subsequent to the gazettal of LPS 11, I think we could safely say that we'll have at least some split density coded properties for a number of years yet.
Okay. Let me go to page 23, the third dot point, which says future changes to the state planning framework may include requirements for sustainable design for all single houses. Do staff wish to speculate on what the timeline might be for such a change from the department?
Through you, Madam Mayor, no, staff do not wish to speculate.
Okay, sorry. In relation to clause 6.12, there's a second dot point there. It's obviously about the solar absorption, and I think in the policy you've got it at 6. Is that correct, Mr. Gibson?
Through Madam Mayor, yes, the draft provision is 0.4 and 0.6, depending on whether it's a flat roof or whether it's a pitch roof, whether it's visible from the street or whether it's not.
So is there much difference if you pull that back to say 5 or 5.5? Does that make a huge difference? I would assume it makes a great deal of difference for the occupants of the house, but I think from a planning point of view, I'm interested in whether that makes a huge difference to the costs for a developer. I would imagine not, but I'm just curious.
Through you, Madam Mayor, it really probably shouldn't have any impact on cost because the cost of a dark sheet is typically the same as the cost of a light sheet. So it's probably more about aesthetics and personal preference than anything else. So council could reduce the 0.6 to 0.55 or 0.5. It will have an environmental impact because you'll be reducing the solar absorptance and increasing the reflectivity. So there will be a commensurate environmental benefit derived. What it will probably do from a practical sense is reduce the suite of colours effectively that the landowner can choose from. But if you're only reducing it by 0.05 or 0.1, you're probably only eliminating 2 or 3 colours, I'd suggest.
Okay. And my last question, seeking your opinion on this, could clause 3A in the draft policy be amended to include all land rather than confined to development of land designated with a split residential coding?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it could. The implication, though, is that every application for a single house that did not meet the deemed to comply provisions of the R codes and therefore required an application for development approval would have to comply with the policy. Now, that's okay. The town could apply the policy in that way, but it will capture a greater volume, or it will increase the application considerably and capture landowners who are simply trying to build a single house on a single lot. If that's the direction that council wants to go, that's okay, but there will be a cost implication for a great number of landowners.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Are there any other questions from councillors? Councillor Polifka and then Councillor McLennan. Councillor Polifka?
I don't think I had my hand up, did I?
I saw your hand there, but it's down now, so no question, Councillor Polifka?
No, thank you.
Okay, Councillor McLennan.
Just following on from the Mayor's question, if the policy was to be applied more broadly for some or all of those different elements, would that impose additional work for the planning staff in assessing compliance?
Through Madam Mayor, somewhat, but not wouldn't pose a major concern. You know, applications for development approval get assessed against, in the case of residential, the R codes, LPP 12, which council recently adopted, LPP 13, tree preservation. So there's a number of frameworks that it's assessed against. If there's one more with a relatively modest number of provisions, it would increase it slightly, but not so as to be a concern.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, councillors, if there's no more questions, we'll move on to the next item. And that is we've done 8.4, so we'll move on to 8.5, which is review of council policies, environmental sustainability and adaptation to climate change. And I'm assuming this would be Ms. Nicole Davies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So there's 9 council policies under the category of environmental sustainability and adaptation to climate change. So they're all overdue for review. The majority of them were last reviewed in March of 2014. So they're all included in attachment 4A. In attachment 4B, there's specific comments against each policy, commenting on whether they're still relevant and where some of the commitments have been superseded by inclusion in other documents, and a recommendation. So because most of these policies are 8 years old, a lot of the content's no longer current, and it's now superseded by the Strategic Community Plan and other documents such as the Waterways Council Action Plan. A lot of the other content is quite operational in nature. For example, the policy 2.2 is about treatment of weeds, and it's a table of the types of weeds or the weed species that the town will control. So there's very limited content in these policies that provide or inform decision making. So as a result of the review, 7 of the 9 policies are recommended to be revoked. There's 2 that we're recommending are retained in the short term, just while we're developing a water-wise Bassendean strategy. So the 2 that are recommended to be reviewed only after that strategy is developed are 2.9, which is water sensitive urban design and water conservation, and 2.11, which is wetlands. So to communicate the town's commitments, both internally to staff and to the community, a separate document has been developed, which is attachment C, which is a natural environment, sustainability and climate action statement. So it's based on the One Planet Living sustainability framework, and it makes reference to the relevant strategic directions of the strategic community plan and each of the specific goals and actions and strategies that we have in place to achieve those. So the aim of this document is it would be similar to the business development statement. So it's a document that's approved by the CEO and then published on the town's website.
Councillor Polifka and followed by Councillor McWilliam.
Just in relation to the foreshore restoration, is that policy being superseded because that work has occurred, or are we taking a different approach to restoration?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the commitments in that policy are being achieved through the foreshore assessment and the state planning policies as well do override a lot of that information. And the direction that we take for foreshore stabilisation is a commitment in the strategic community plan. So it's still being undertaken, it's just the commitment is provided elsewhere and some of the content's been now superseded.
Okay, and in terms of that work, so you say that's ongoing. So in terms of our, I suppose, reserves and that which abut the river, we're constantly looking at how we can improve those.
Yes, that's correct. We're doing an annual, so there was the original foreshore assessment done March of last year, and we'll be redoing that on an annual basis. The other element that was in the previous or the current policy, so we're looking at a new action to be included in the corporate business plan, and that will be subject to council endorsement to finalise the Bassendean foreshore precinct plan. So that's a draft document that was developed in 2014, and it looks at all land management adjacent to the river foreshore. So that's another new action that would achieve some of the intent of the current policy.
Okay, and in terms of those treatments, I mean, that's something which council would, I suppose, be called upon to make a decision in terms of, I suppose, by way of example, if you take land which is eroding by the river as to whether that's to be stabilised by vegetation, a rockery, or I suppose in more extreme instances, a more man-made interface, whether that be concrete or wooden boards as do appear in some parts of the district?
So for any foreshore stabilisation project, it would have to be approved as part of the budget, and that would include the design and also the construction. In most situations, because they'd be in a park or a reserve, we would also undertake consultation with the community and adjacent residents as well.
Okay. No, excellent. Thank you.
Councillor McWilliam.
Well, I'll feed the great minds amendment and say that Councillor Polifka has asked the question that I had, and staff have addressed that admirably, so I have nothing further. Thank you.
Any other councillors with questions? Otherwise, I've got one or two. I suppose this is a curiosity question from my part. I'm just wondering why we wish to revoke a collection of policies before the creation of the replacement policy, that is the Waterwise Bassendean strategy, which is going to be created in 2022-23 financial year.
So the two existing policies that relate to waterwise Bassendean are recommended to be retained until that strategy is developed. And all the remaining policies aren't affected or have no relationship to the waterwise Bassendean strategy.
Okay. Okay, I'll leave it at there at that point for the moment. I might come back to you on that point during the week. If there are no other questions from councillors, we'll move on to the next item. And I can't see any hands up. So the next item is 8.6, proposed CAT amendment local law 2022. And I think this is Mr. Gibson again.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This report is pretty straightforward. It's to enable council to make the CATS Amendment Local Law 2022. The matter was last considered by council in December last year, whereby council resolved to provide an undertaking in relation to one of the provisions and thereafter advertise the required change. That advertising took place and no submissions were received. Council is now simply required to make the amendments local law to complete the process.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Are there any questions from Councillor McLennan?
Sorry. Mr. Gibson's had me harass him a number of times about the CAT local law. I'm sorry. Can I just request, so as you're aware, Mr. Gibson, the City of Fremantle is also attempting to update their CAT local laws and have tried a different approach to us with, I think they're saying they're attempting to declare any property that's owned and managed by the city as a CAT prohibited area. I know that not enough time yet has probably passed for the result of that attempt to be known, but can I request that we keep an eye on that, and if they are successful, that we potentially revisit this local law ourselves?
Yep, certainly, Madam Deputy Mayor. We'll keep tabs on the process around the City of Fremantle and can update council through the bulletin and consider what action we take in response.
Right, thank you.
Okay, councillors, if there's no other questions on this, we'll move to the next item, which is 8.7, Audit and Governance Committee meeting held on the 9th of March 2022. And this would be Mr. White. If you would like to speak to it at all, Mr. White.
Yes, thank you. Oh, this is awkward. Sorry, can you hear the feedback?
Yeah, there's a bit coming through.
Okay. Sorry, I've dialed in because I had problems with my sound earlier. So I've just hung up that now. So yes, the Audit and Governance Committee meeting was held on Wednesday. There were 6 items on the agenda. The first one was a response to the auditor's report, indicating the adverse movements in the 2 ratios that we've discussed before, the operating surplus ratio and the asset sustainability ratio. The requirement is under the regs for us to provide a report to the Minister for Local Government to inform the Minister of what we're doing to address those. So the draft report was put through the committee to council. The committee did make an amendment to the officer recommendation by including an additional point, which is reproduced in recommendation 4 of the report to council, and it's talking about council considering increased allocations or increased expenditure on asset renewal for those assets that are earmarked for retention by the town. The next item on the agenda was the annual compliance audit return. This was tabled by Libby. I would throw to Libby, apart from the fact that probably all that needs to be said about this is that there's 98 areas of compliance that the return tests, and we were compliant in all areas this year, which was a great result. The third item was proposed amendments to the town's purchasing policy, specifically in relation to the sole supply exemption. This was brought to the committee, I guess, in response to a decision by council last year to reduce the delegation to the CEO from $250,000 down to $50,000 for a sole supply exemption. It was felt that the existing requirements in the policy were too restrictive for that lower delegation, specifically in relation to the requirement for extensive market testing and also limiting a sole supply exemption to a 12-month period. We're proposing the removal of both of those, which brings our policy in line with the requirement of the regulations, which is that the CEO must be satisfied that because of the unique nature of the goods or services or for any other reason, it is unlikely there is more than one supplier. So the administration feels that the proposed amendments achieve a better balance between managing the procurement risk and achieving operational efficiency. The fourth matter was a new risk management policy and framework, and I might ask the CEO to address this one. It came under her hand to the committee.
Thank you very much, Paul. What we have, councillors, is a new risk management policy and procedures, and the two combined make up a new framework. And we also have a new reporting tool, which is based on a number of risk themes. So the combination of the framework and the profile reporting tool is really designed to provide council with assurance. So every 6 months you'll be receiving a report.
Sorry, I actually have no sound. I was dialed in before. I had to hang up so that you're not inundated with feedback. Perhaps I'll continue and then dial in again and take questions. Apologies. The fifth item on the agenda was a fraud and corruption policy and a new fraud and corruption control framework. This is, I guess, been a long time coming, and we put a fair bit of work and effort into it. It largely follows the Australian standard, but is adapted for the specific, it's tailored to the town's requirements. There is a fair bit of information, a fair bit of work that we need to do to implement this should council adopt the new policy and plan, but it's a clear statement of council's zero tolerance approach to fraud and corruption, and the supporting framework provides good details on the town's approach to prevention, detection and response activities. And the final item on the agenda was the audit risk register, which is tabled at every meeting of the committee.
Okay, councillors, does anyone have any questions on this particular item? No? Okay. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 9.1, a notice of motion by Councillor Polifka. There's no officer commentary on this. So if councillors want to leave this till next week, we can discuss it when we have an officer commentary there. But I would ask the CEO if we've got Councillor Polifka wanting to speak. I'll just ask the CEO quickly, Councillor Polifka first. Councillors are free to ask questions, but is that right, Ms. Mads?
You can certainly ask questions of Councillor Polifka. The reason we haven't provided an officer response at this stage, we did provide some information in the bulletin on Friday in respect to a question that Councillor McLennan raised at the previous council meeting, and provided some information on the mechanisms, levers to stimulate, facilitate development, incentivise development, I think the words were. And I guess we were, I guess, looking for some further feedback in terms of, did this partially answer Councillor Polifka's question? is there some further work there to be done? In which case we will frame our response for next week's meeting accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Plifka, I know you have your hand up.
Yes. So notice of motion. I'm hope will be a discussion point which will elaborate on that concept that Councillor McLennan had raised at the last ordinary council meeting. I suppose the questions I have are for administration as to how we can better frame that notice of motion. I mean, in particular, we need to identify the right kind of expert. So whilst our town planners have been very good at identifying policies that would have a, had the potential to have a negative impact, well, not a negative impact, but would have a cost impost on development, and so may have an effect on people's decisions to invest. I was looking to quantify that. So the question to administration, perhaps to Mr. Gibson, is who would be the appropriate expert that or consultant that we could use who could provide us with some figures around decisions that we make? That is, I mean, who could tell us or give us an idea that where we do forego amounts of money which we would otherwise be able to collect through our policies, what benefit is that providing to the town? How is that stimulating development? Or conversely, if we make decisions where we put cost imposts in place, how many people are we turning away? So just, I suppose my basic question is, who would be the appropriate expert that we could use to do this work? And look, that expert may well be able to even frame the question more adequately for us. So who would that expert be?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I don't know. We could get an opinion on various matters from sort of the industry bodies, the UDIA, the Urban Development Institute of Australia might be able to provide some information, but I'd imagine in many ways the information would be fairly broad and generic, and be of the nature that if a local government increases the costs associated with development, there is a commensurate reduction in the attractiveness of developing in that local government area. I'm really not sure how you'd be able to quantify the effect of a policy change or a fee change, and say with any degree of certainty that, say for the public art, for the argument's sake, given that sort of the start of the discussion, whether someone would, whether you're going to be able to find some sort of consultant that would accurately articulate that over the next 5 years, if council waives the fee, it will expect X applications. If council doesn't waive the fee, it will expect Y applications. I just don't think there is a consultant out there is going to be able to provide with any degree of certainty that information. But I think it is, as we've set out in the bulletin, it's safe to sort of suggest that as costs go up, viability goes down. So that is the general principle that sort of underpinned the discussions thus far. But whether there's a consultant out there that could quantify what the impact would be for a developer or a town or a local government more generally, I'm not sure.
Or perhaps even if we were to, I suppose, reframe the question and say, using that example of the 1% for art, I think we all, well, the decision of council, which I'm certainly not seeking to displace, but the consensus there appeared to be that 1% wouldn't be sufficient to scuttle a project, but there will become a, I suppose, percentage increase that may well be that straw that breaks the camel's back. So just as to whether we could get an opinion in a more limited form, where somebody might say, well, you increase costs by 20%, nothing's going to happen. I mean, that's just an extreme example, and I don't know how that would occur. But maybe there's a magic figure, might be 7%. I mean, the point in all of this is that I simply don't know. And I mean, if we can somehow inform ourselves of these matters, I think we'd be making better decisions. But that's the reason for the motion. So perhaps that can be reformulated. I mean, is there perhaps any merit in that, where we come up with a percentage increase where we could more or less say that we're going to be less attractive than commensurate local governments?
I suppose through you, Madam Mayor, what someone could do is benchmark the town against other local governments in terms of what fees and charges are applied. I think in that sense, though, I would fully expect that we would be reasonably similar to nearby local governments. Public art policies are now commonplace. Application fees are set by the plan development regs. From an infrastructure point of view, obviously similar locations have similar drainage demands, that sort of thing. So I think even a benchmark exercise would probably be reasonably unremarkable. And I suppose the point that was made in the officer report on public art is that it's not an exact science, but if you increase costs, you reduce viability, and if you reduce viability, you will get less development. We could obviously speak to the UDIA and get them to provide us a statement to that effect, or any information that they might have already assembled, and that could be a starting point, perhaps.
No, I think this has been a useful discussion, and that does give me some comfort that we've at least got a starting point. So thank you for that.
So unless another councillor has a question, I actually do have a question of Councillor Polifka, if you don't mind answering.
No, not at all.
I'm curious about the relationship between areas that become popular with developers, and I would ask you whether you would agree with an assessment that potentially those areas that become very popular with developers are those ones that are on the cusp of gentrification, and there are things happening. It looks like a suburb that's going to bloom, for lack of a better word. I'm wondering if you would agree that that might be an attractive incentive for developers to come to an area rather than receiving a discount of some description on fees or charges. I'm curious about, and perhaps this is one for the officers as well, are there examples of areas where there has been investment in the public areas that has led to developers deciding that the suburb is going to move forward and they're going to put their dollars in that area because they are estimating that it's going to transform into a really interesting suburb in the next 5 to 10 years. I asked this because I grew up in Queensland, and there were some areas in Brisbane that went through this massive transformation in a very short timeline. So I'm curious about the relationship, whether either yourself, Councillor Polifka, or staff see a relationship between improvement in the public realm and developers deciding to put their money into that area.
I suppose I can go first in relation to that. I think myself and everyone else on council is fairly optimistic about what we're doing here in Bassendean. So I think it certainly would fit into that category of suburbs that are where a lot of action is occurring and where there's a lot of interest. I mean, that may equally be the case for places such as Bayswater. I mean, they may well be having a discussion and saying, well, we have all of this to offer as well. I mean, we're a little biased here, and we say we're probably have more to offer. But I mean, that's a matter of debate for people that reside in those various local governments. But in terms of what I'm seeking to do, is to, and I suppose to use the gardening analogy in terms of getting the town to bloom, just put a little bit of fertilizer down. Start that. Spark that flame that by giving these incentives over a short period of time, which then turns into the inferno. And once it's self-sustaining, I mean, we could more or less charge whatever we liked, and people are going to come because of the runaway success that Bassendean is. So, I mean, I'm not too concerned about in the long run, but it's just getting that initial spark, getting a critical mass of interest, and I think it'll be that chain reaction from there. So that's really all I'm seeking to do, is just to get that first little bit of momentum, and then it'll take off.
Thank you. So unless I don't see any other hands up, so unless we've got any more questions, I would like to move on to the next item, which is a confidential item. So I will need a mover to go behind closed doors.
Yep, happy to do so.
Councillor Polifka, a seconder, Councillor McWilliam, and there's no one else against, so we will go behind closed doors. I'd ask Libby if the recording is, when the recording